episode is brought to you by the Consultancy Growth Network. As you'll know, I'm a big believer in learning from people who've achieved the things that you want to. It's why I run this podcast, to share the stories of consulting leaders and how they've got to where they are today. So when I started talking to Mark Jansen and the team at Consultancy Growth Network, it was clear there was an obvious fit between Climate Consulting and their mission and what they are building with their network. But you're probably asking, what is the Consultancy Growth Network? The Consultancy Growth Network is the leading community of boutique consulting leaders. It brings together seasoned consulting growth experts who successfully scaled their own boutiques, with rapidly growing consulting founders looking to emulate their success. Now, you might be thinking, who are these growth experts? What do they actually know about consulting? And this is one of the most exciting things that personally I find about the network. The team at the Consultancy Growth Network have searched far and wide for some of the best boutique consulting leaders to help their members on their journeys, some of which I have previously interviewed for this podcast, such as Dom Morehouse and Augusto Negrillo. But it's not just the insights from these people that you will benefit from. By joining, you get access to their jam-packed calendar of regular in-person and online events, their comprehensive growth hub of resources, and their active Slack community. Through all of these channels, you can learn, solve challenges, and achieve the goals you want for your firm. And now, if that wasn't enough reason to sign up, the Consultancy Growth Network is giving all listeners to this podcast a special sign-up offer. If you join for 12 months, you join for that next year, you will get your 13th month for free, giving you that extra month to continue to build on everything you're learning and continue to benefit from the network. To sign up, just visit consultancygrowthnetwork.com or contact their partnerships director, Luke at consultancygrowthnetwork.com. And when you're talking about joining, mention Create Engage or Climate Consulting, and you will get that special sign-up offer. Hi, and welcome to today's episode of Climate Consulting. In this one, I get to speak to Tobias Robinson, Managing Director at Cross8. Now, this one is extra special for me because Tobias, or Toby as I know him, was actually listener number one to the podcast. He was the first ever person who reached out to me off the back of episodes 1 and 2. And it has been fantastic to watch his growth journey in the years since. Over that time, he has gone from early stage founder to leading a consultancy that's quadrupled in size, and doing so while staying true to his values and having a ton of fun along the way. In this conversation, we talk about everything from growing a consultancy in a smart and sustainable way to why autonomy, culture, and practical experience matter more than ever in the consultancy space. We also dive into some really interesting topics around the importance of entrepreneurship and how we can be doing more to teach the next generation about it. And Toby lets us into the story behind Cross8's latest initiative, a global expedition designed to bring the team closer together and create lasting impact for them. Now, there is so much in here, whether you are growing your own consultancy and you're looking for advice on how to maintain that culture as you do, or whether you want to hear a different perspective on how to start and scale a consultancy. I know that you are going to love this one. So with the intro done, all that's left to say is please enjoy today's conversation with Tobias Robinson. Toby, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Well, it is brilliant to have you on. It has been many years. I know we were talking about it as I want to call you listener number one, because you were the very first person who reached out about the podcast, having listened, 2018, so 6 years ago. And I'm very excited to talk about everything that's been happening for you since then.
That's fantastic. I mean, it feels like a huge privilege coming on, not least because as the business has grown, we've sort of, it's grown alongside the podcast. So I think some of the early ones and sort of meeting Dom through your early episodes and going on his course 6 years ago, whatever it was, is, a number of bits have been a huge part of our story of how we've grown and obviously working with yourselves in subsequent years. So, yeah.
Yeah. I completely forgot about the Dom's course as well. It was one that I'd wished I could go on, and then COVID happened, and I don't think he's running them anymore. So I think you might have even been the last cohort of those.
I think we might be. I've lobbied him since. Obviously, he's part of the Consultancy Growth Network, and they're offering a slightly different model through that, which is brilliant. But yeah, that sort of 3-day residential course that he did was just really, really good.
Amazing. Well, if Dom is listening, or anyone who knows Dom, we have the ask. And so we've got a lot to dive into. And I'm really excited to talk through them because I think your journey is probably a path less traveled, and I'm really keen to explore all of those aspects. And maybe we start with entrepreneurship in general, because I know it's something you're hugely passionate about. And I also know it's something you're instilling in your kids. And I'd love to understand your take on, I guess, where entrepreneurship is, and almost from an education standpoint, having just seen this, like, what are we not doing that we should be educating our kids on to learn more about entrepreneurship? Because it applies equally to kids as it does to people starting their career, to people who are even thinking of going and running their own business.
Yeah, so it's definitely something I spend quite a lot of time thinking about at the moment. Not least, I've got a 17-year-old and a 15-year-old, so they're hitting more at that point of getting to the later stage of school education and sort of next steps. So I think entrepreneurship is hugely important. If you look at some of the challenges around the economy and growth, it's entrepreneurship's the key to creating more jobs, to creating more opportunities for people. So it's not that everybody needs to go off and be an entrepreneur, but we need enough, and we need to sort of be developing that. I think there's probably 3 or 4 things that hold it back in this country. And I should frame it, and I love living and working in Britain. I originally grew up here. I went and spent some time in Australia. We can talk about. I came back. I think there's huge opportunities here. It's a huge economy, but there are some bits that I think hold it back. So, if you take the educational system, I think to some extent it's a challenge around the globe. You can have a fantastic set of teachers, but teachers stereotypically have gone through an education system themselves when they were a child. They've then stereotypically gone off to university. They've then come back and they're educationalists. So they're in a job. And that's sort of a path that they understand. And that's sort of success where they can take a lot of people through that. So it's part of my hang up when I hear it of what job do you want to do? I mean, job's convenient. It's nicely packaged. It's a job. You're going to go work for someone. Someone else is going to give you the mandate to do something. There's a lot less about understanding that path to go, or there's a whole range of things that aren't characterized by being a job. So that's a challenge. Particularly, if I took an experience, it's there's a certain amount of opportunities come from what environment you grow up in. I think from my environment, my father served in the army for 31 years and another 14 working for them. So I didn't grow up around a kitchen table seeing businesses.
I was going to say that's not the typical, I guess, upbringing for many entrepreneurs. Forces tend to breed forces, at least is my experience.
And probably even more so. So I went to military boarding school down Dover, which was fantastic. But one of the criteria to go there is one of your parents, and it was nearly always the dad at the time, must have served 4 years in the regs, at least, which meant you're not even in a school where your mate's parent is
everyone there is a military child of military.
Yes. That was the criteria
parents.
to go.
Wow.
Whether you went into it or not, but that was the criteria to be able to attend. And while some will have left and done other stuff, you're not even in a diverse sort of group of friends where your mate might have parents that were running a business or doing stuff. So there's a bit, a lot in life, it's a bit of what you see and what you know and what the art of the possible is. But I think if you couple those two things, if you take are you getting opportunities in terms of the environment you're growing up, how much the school system can encourage it. And I see at the moment, it's very much with my boys, the school is fantastic, but it's very much, you're going to go to university, aren't you? Yeah. And then you're going to, these days, apprenticeship. That's fine, but it's that sort of defined thing. And for a while, my eldest wanted to, and then he moved away from that, partly seeing some of the stuff we do and wants to do something slightly different. And at that point, I think the school gets quite lost as to where you want to go. And partly I'd frame it if you can reverse engineer it, if you said, okay, you go and do something different, you want to be a mountaineer. You go climb mountains. If in 5 years you've climbed Everest, the school would be desperate for you to come back and talk. But if you said, I'm going to go live in a van for the next 6 months in the Alps because I need to develop some climbing experience, then they don't really know what to do with that. And I think it's the same for businesses. If you set up a business, I mean, if you took an extreme thing, if you were Ben Francis or something like that and you just set up Gymshark, like every school wants to talk to you. But when you're initially setting up and you're on the kitchen table and you haven't followed the defined route, I think is a lot harder. So something that there isn't an easy fix. It's more partnership. I think there are some good signs in terms of we live in an era now where I think it's far more common for things like having a side hustle, other stuff that might take people more into that entrepreneurial route. But it would be interesting because I do think as AI progressively takes out a whole range of jobs, it will change the jobs, but I think we will move more more and more towards a market where it's different in business ideas, it's new innovation as opposed to the traditional job.
It's an interesting point, and I wonder, particularly for our listeners who've been through that process. I was one of these people who went to university, and the university debate has many facets for me, because the other part is it's a 3-year holiday, which we can or cannot get into. I think it's changed now. When I was there, the cost of the holiday was much lower than it is now, which makes the business case different. But how does that, and I suspect it's some of those pieces don't change, but how does that sort of, I guess, context change for any of our listeners who maybe, they're in consultancies, they're early in that career? Because I guess you've then got that interesting challenge of when you're 17, to your point, there's school pressure, but you don't have income pressure. You've got parents, you haven't got peers who are earning money. You get to 24, you've got peers, you've got, rent to pay. And also, if you're in consulting, you are used to a reasonable lifestyle, a reasonable level of income. How would you, for anyone thinking, I'd love to do this, Toby, but I don't even know where to start. I don't know if I am entrepreneurial. What would you recommend people do to test it? Or would you recommend they just burn the ships and, dive straight in?
No, I wouldn't recommend burning the ships unless that's your mindset. So I think if you take a few things. So firstly, there's that statement, you are the product of the 5 closest people. So if whilst you might be in consultancy and by its nature, it is entrepreneurial, but depending on the size of the consultancy and where you fit in it as to how much you're really seeing that versus you are in an entrepreneurial business, but you're doing a more traditional job. So there's a bit about what sort of environment you're putting yourself in, who you're mixing with. So I think that's part of it. I think a big bit is understanding your risk appetite. So partly the thing I would have about businesses, I never set out to build businesses because that thing over there could make a lot of money and we're just going to make money. I'm not in even in consultancy, I'm not in a 5-year, we're just going to build it, we'll sell it. I don't care if I hate it, we're just going to do it. So I think there's part of it of getting a balance between you're not kidding yourself that you're just doing things that are hobbies that don't go further. If you're genuinely serious about wanting to make more of a business about it, there's a separate...
We've all spent a long time in spreadsheets analyzing. I have one friend in particular who has had more business ideas than I think he's had hot dinners, which, yes, I take your point.
Yeah, and there is a whole host, right? And if you take it into packages, for those that are doing something that interests them, even if that's more of a hobby, that's fine. Don't kid yourself, it's a business, but it's a hobby. That's fine. That's really good as well. I think there is definitely a point where you've got to step up and go for it. But I suppose there's a couple of bits about how enjoyable that journey is going to be. So firstly, I always maintain, even with whether it's traditional work, whether it's a business, I would always characterize it, it's not footballers' money. I know this is harsh because you don't get to suddenly get the top footballers' money for 6 months and leave. But my point is, you're not making 10, 15 million. And even if you hate it, you did it for 6 months, cashed out and went. I get that's not how they work. But whatever you're building, you're going to be doing it for quite some time. So if it's things that you've got a passion for, if it's things you enjoy, if it's, I think that is one hugely important bit in terms of staying the course and enjoying the journey. And then I think the second bit that is pretty important between it, make it a success or not, is your appetite for risk and trying to align with that. So I know some people who wouldn't even want to contract, just want to go perm because it just makes them deeply uncomfortable, the view of contracting. The reality is, unless you've been there for quite some time, you probably in these days don't have that much security within permanent employment, but it's psychological. It just makes them deeply uncomfortable. I've met other people that are the other extreme, would just borrow everything, risk everything. Now, I'm very much in the middle. I want to take managed risks. The concept of going and borrowing heavily and doing it would just wouldn't work for me. I'd be quite uncomfortable with the process. So I think if you can try and align those things, that's a much happier place to be. And always remember, it was not a business so much as just a side investment, but I can remember one of my friends telling me about a friend of his who, this is years ago, but had built up about 7 houses, all fairly leveraged when people were building portfolio. Was a contractor, needed another contract within 2 weeks. Maxed his credit cards. It was utterly stuffed. That is not a world I want to live in. That is, so I think that, but if you are happy doing that, that's fine. That's, and maybe you'll have more success that you're able to do that. But I think if you can do those 2 bits, or 3 bits, so ideally if you can start surrounding yourself, mixing with other people that are doing it, it will be easier to start that with that mindset. I think if you can look at different business ideas, but you're still pursuing passions and interests because you're going to spend a bunch of time on it. And I think if you can try and do it in a way that aligns with your risk appetite, or in a way that you can build it. So some of our risk appetite is sort of learned experiences. So, are there small bets you can take? Are there things that make that, rather than feeling like it's got to be some huge idea and it's going to be really risky?
And because I think it's a really good point to just dig into and bring to life for anyone who is thinking about that small bets. Because you're right. I think, entrepreneurship has become cool over the last decade, and that is a blessing as much as a curse, because there's a lot of people who talk about it, and the burn the ships mentality can sometimes, you hear the stories, I had nothing, slept on a floor, and then became a millionaire. And I do think there's a winner's bias to that. You don't hear about the people who slept on the floor and are still sleeping on the floor. How would you advise someone, if they're a consultant today, what could those small bets look like? What, maybe what did you do? What have you advised others to do? Because I'm sure people have asked you this question before.
Yeah, so we can go on. They say similar. I think we've talked in the past about, you had early adventures. If I take it back to my story, so my story was slightly different. I'd left school, just rebelled a bit against the system. Didn't want to, I think I was the only one in my year that didn't go to uni, although I think subsequently several dropped out. It wasn't for them, but that was the sort of route. I went off to Australia. I got very lucky in the second year in that I got hired as a contractor into a bank, but under a consultancy. So I didn't work for the consultancy. It was a small boutique. They brought some extra people in on sort of the, direct to the bank, which absolutely worked perfectly, because I sort of got certainly a reasonable amount of the experience of this boutique consultancy and some of the stuff they were going through. But then I could stay and move around the bank without it wasn't moving from them to the bank. And I just got a lot of opportunities through it. There was a lot of stuff going on at the time. And having started making some money, I invested, started setting up a couple of businesses. Yeah, not good. And the ideas were good, but I didn't understand enough about business. Going back to, I'd probably, particularly through my teenage years, starting hustling a bit more, side jobs, other things I could do, but I wasn't coming back from a more structured background. Definitely didn't have a mentor or a parent. I'm saying, like, I'm doing these things, but you learn a lot from it. It's an interesting thing I think it's widely reported that there's a business culture thing in the UK and possibly in Europe that is more adverse to failure. It's probably the extreme thing in the US. Australia was really nice. It was probably a halfway house. It was, no one's going to pat you on the back and go, that was brilliant, you failed on this. But at the same time, you learned something. The things I did, the only things I lost was my money. So I guess I hadn't gone and raised a whole load of money from other people and felt like I'd let them down. But firstly, I think you get a bunch of experiences, and probably whilst I lost some money, it probably set me up really well for later years. Just got to learn some of those lessons. It doesn't mean you have to do everything badly, but it was a way of doing it. And then I think other stuff, for example, is we went more into consultancy. So we came out of a contractor background. I think I had, I'd worked across a number of industries. I loved doing transformation. I always wanted to do it in different things. I wanted to move between different sectors. I always had friends who just did one thing, could get a contract within an hour or two. And I was like, but the last thing I want to do is do exactly what I just did before. And so that worked well for years. But I think through the contracting route, there's a sort of natural ceiling at program director. You can, through the contract route, step up from sort of project manager, program director. It's quite hard to move into C-suite or something else if you haven't already done it. So there are contract consultant C-suite roles, but typically they're looking for someone who's done it already. And at that point, it was either become one of those people that gets trapped. They were doing really well. The money's quite nice. They don't want to give up the money, but they haven't really got a route to go beyond. So they were going somewhere, and then they 10, 20 years later, they're still at the same place, or go and set up the business and start driving that. But so we risked a level of, I guess, savings and time to start with, but we built it slowly with a small staff. So it wasn't taking huge risks. And I think probably for the first few years, it was quite like that. So for me, that was a way of managing it. We've never borrowed for the business. I guess we were in a position we could do that. I guess I'm also fortunate. So one of the other co-founders was Wendy, my wife, who also works in the same field. So we did have the benefit of two incomes driving it. So I guess that was our opportunity. Other people may not have that opportunity. They might not have quite the same earnings. They might not be a dual earner, in which case it's looking for, I think, other opportunities that they can try on the side. But probably the other bit of it's not advice, it's I've heard over the years is, there's a couple, right? You will regret more what you didn't try than what you did. How much it might be a bit painful if you try something that doesn't quite work. And certainly for the first 2, 3, 4 years, you can always go back to what you were doing. So whether you can do something on the side and that allows you to test it, whether you do step away 6 months, try it. Okay, it didn't work, but you haven't been out the industry for 10 years and it's quite hard to go back into it. So for most people, I don't think it's as risky as they maybe perceive it is.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. And yes, to our conversations about kind of my journey, I've done it both ways. I did the let's take out what was at the time a big loan and burn the ships. But also, I think your point on failure is interesting because I think the challenge, and you might have had this in military boarding school, you can tell me, is that if you've been through an education system that rewards, getting A's and passing, and then you go into a world of work where you've got a grad scheme and you're progressing, you actually have never failed. And that creates quite to your point, there is a cultural piece, but there's also just that personal, I don't fail, there's an identity thing. And for me, it was that, failure of the business and actually realizing nothing changed, still had wife, still had friends, still had, flat at the time. And I know for me, and this is sharing in case it's useful for others, that's quite liberating because you're like, oh, well, nothing happened. And I could have done an MBA for 25 grand, but I probably had more fun and didn't have to do as much homework. And that was a real starting point. And then I think your piece, and it's great advice, particularly because our listeners are consultants. So, we have a huge luxury of working in a role that is very high income. And if you contract, even higher income. And actually, as you say, that's how I started this business, exactly the same. I built up a bit of a war chest because you don't need to spend that much money, rent, food. I don't need a Ferrari right now. That money then becomes the seed money for the business, which sounds very similar to what you and Wendy did.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's not to say it won't be, almost that liberating thing, right? It's like, if it doesn't all go perfectly, and invariably business doesn't, even if that just means there's a lull for a while, or there's, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a comfortable experience. But what's liberating is that you get through it, right? And you realize, it wasn't as monumental as it might otherwise have sound.
Well, and I think it's a good place, Toby, to turn to the journey with Cross8. And I know we were talking a lot about this before the show, and I think there's some really interesting parts of that. So do you want to maybe just give people the very fast journey of kind of started, got to this size, did this, now we're here, and then let's work through that, because I think the context will really help bring that story to life.
Yep, can do. So I guess the 30 seconds will of what Cross8 is. So we're a specialist business transformation, commercial optimization consultancy. So business transformation, we're not a strategy house, but evolving strategy in terms of what it means to the organization, op models, customer journeys, design type work into large scale programs. Commercial optimization, combination of sort of cost optimization, internal and external. And then supply chain, but particularly large scale outsourcing or rationalizing a whole supply chain. Typically working in utilities, infrastructure, and FS, so particularly life and pensions, building societies, retail banking. So we'd started from a background of that. We'd sort of gone through that point of want to do something different, want to start growing something, set up 11 years ago. Went through a bit of that evolution, sort of that belief that we were genuinely had some really good relationships. We had a really good track record, that challenge to go through people seeing past that and going, I'm prepared to buy the team, as opposed to Nick, I think you're awesome. No, I want you. I don't want the team. So I think that was an evolution to work through it. We did well. I think the first year was quite hard to break that perception. So we had work, we were doing stuff, but in terms of properly breaking out, and then we just got a couple of really good opportunities. And I guess that is an interesting one for people we've worked with and really rated us over the years, have recommended us into other places. But most of the people we've bought are people that have met us as the company. I think that's you start with I've got really good relationships and I've worked and I've delivered things to you before when you're on it. And I guess like all of us, it's a bit like remembering someone even in a job who was a great project analyst who now 15 years later is a program director, and go, that's awesome. Do you want to do some more project analysis? Not really. So we did that for about 8 years and haven't got the right term for it. Essentially, we were running a good scale. Like lots of consultants don't really like doing sales. Stereotypically, I like building, I like transforming, I like progressively moving forward. The boom and bust of the sort of sales machine is a lot less comfortable. And so for a lot, we would do some marketing, but then we relied a lot on just inbound contacts. But our work profile is we are typically running things for 2, 3, 4 years. Even if we go and help them with the problem for 3 months, we're good. When we get in, they typically want us to keep going through the life cycle. So we ran it like that for about 8 years. And then at that point, it was, we should just take this a bit more seriously. We should start growing it. I think to Dom's course, we weren't working towards a sale, but to Dom's challenge of, the things they look for in a sale is just the signs of a well-run business. Too much was vested in individuals and personal relationships as opposed to the machine. And that works really well as long as people are picking up the phone at the right point. You maybe only need 1, 2 sales that open up another big program in a year, but if they don't pick it up at the phone at the right point as something else is ending, that gets a lot harder. And also just how much interesting stuff is out there, how much other stuff that you didn't get considered for because either they didn't know about you or they did, but they didn't think about you at the time. So that's sort of really started scaling and changing over the last 3 years.
Fantastic. And I think the obvious question that if I was listening, I'd wonder, and I know we touched on this, what was that change? I know there was the kind of the period where you were doing more of a full-time role, which might have, been the catalyst, but you mentioned how we just said, we decided we're going to scale this. And to help people, can you give a kind of where you were before you scaled it, people and revenue if you're happy to, and then kind of where you are now?
Yep. So we were probably doing about 2.5 million before we started rescaling it. And I don't know what we were at the time, maybe 18, 20 people. We're currently at about 8 million and about 50 people.
Wow. So 4 times the size in 3 years, which is pretty serious growth.
So that's going well off the back of some really good partnerships with different organisations. So that's helped, and clearly we live in the last 18 months it's a difficult market, right? So it's so that's been really good. Yeah, I mean some of it was simply a personal journey. So I think we were doing it for a while. I described at one point I really fell out of love with it. We were doing some work, and some of the stuff I was personally doing for a particular client, they were really happy. It was good business. But it was very slow moving. I was really unsatisfied with it. Just hit a point. Interestingly, at the same point, I went on Dom's course. So when Dom's saying, "What's your big statements? What are you going to do?" And that was an interesting bit to work through, although it was useful. And then I sort of found something slightly on the side. So we were already working with Prudential. M&G, they were very keen at the time that for a couple of big things, would I go permanent? And it sort of felt like I was there anyway. I've never done the permanent thing. I think I had a permanent job for 4 months as a labourer when I first left school before I went to Australia. And because in Australia, my limited company could hold my visa. I didn't like the fact of being employed and someone else had my right to be in the country. So I sort of fell into that. And then when I came back, the opportunities in utilities and other stuff, it just worked. So I'd never really moved away from it. So I did that for a bit. So the agreement I had with them is as long as there wasn't a conflict of interest, we were working in different sectors and other stuff, then I could keep the business going as well. We had enough of the team running the wider business. So I was still doing bits on it, but I wouldn't did that. Probably scratched an itch. I think I went through that.
And how long were you there for? Just again for our listeners' context.
So we worked with them for 4 years, but about two and a bit years as permanent. So I was commercial and transformation director.
And as everyone would know, that's a serious, that's a proper job. Like, how did you manage the business? Was that Wendy took the lead on the business? Were you just, your 9 to 5 was there, your 5 to 9 was cross-8? Because we'll have some listeners who are running, businesses at 2 million and working 70 hours a week. How did you guys cut that?
So I guess I've always done the strategy and shaping and leading of it. We've got a good team in place. So that was running. It's interesting, partly in terms of where your natural mindset is and what you do and how you square it. So I've never been saying I'm working 15-hour days and there's the other peak where it's been busy, but it wasn't because I was, working full-time in London during the week and then working all weekend on it as well. Like any business, it tends to be a bit all-encompassing. Yes, you do end up doing stuff pretty much every day, but it wasn't I was doing stupid hours. But I think it's interesting, even when you're in a normal job. The people that they pick up a bit more responsibility and they go, I'm maxed. I can't do anything else. And you go well, okay, but the CEO's 3 or 4 levels above you. They're running the whole thing. How are you maxed here? And some of that is just generally how much I can get other resource, how much I can scale, stuff like that. Sometimes I have to do some of the stuff. But a lot of it is mindset. How much are you shaping and how much are you putting yourself in a position, even if you're staying, whether you're a consultant and you want to go higher, whether you're in a permanent job in an organization, if you want to go higher, you sort of got to show that, okay, I've got that, and I can shape it, and I can put it into a space it can run, and now I've got more capacity. So I think even in the time at M&G, I went from, so I had the commercial role, which was optimizing the cost base, doing all large deals for them, dealing with anything that was non-standard. So got a couple of times where people tried to take us into dispute and other things. And then picked up the transformation director as well, which was running another team where we did all the so the board reporting and a whole transformation planning process across the end-to-end organization. And then towards the end, I picked up the supplier risk as well. That was getting more of a focus from the FCA and things we had to do. But in each case, you're trying to go, how strong is the team? What are we really trying to achieve? What's structured there? Can I make it work to the point I've got more capacity to do the next thing? And I probably do the same thing with the business. So it's how are you coming up with the ideas or driving some of the things? How are you putting the right mechanics in place that it starts to move? Because otherwise you're just randomly chucking out ideas. But then are you someone that then naturally wants to do all the detail? I think what you do find with a lot of business people is quite often, particularly if they're growing, they'll have some liberating moment. I know of one completely different business, a truck haulage business. And I think he broke his leg, something like that. And he's only went from, I can't be driving shifts and doing other stuff. Had a whole team. I think they had 100 trucks, but suddenly stopped, suddenly in the office, suddenly start doing, got a couple of people to do some of the more menial stuff, and then hit that light bulb moment of, why did I not do this years ago? Like, why was I filling all my time doing all these things? So I think some of it's just how you structure it and shape it, but it definitely wasn't a work 15 hours a day as a consistent every day of the last year type thing. So
if you are enjoying this episode so far, I have one small ask. I would massively appreciate if you could open your phone right now, hit share, and send this to someone in your network, one of your friends, one of your colleagues, one of your clients who you think would benefit from this interview. This podcast only runs because of you and because of the value you get from it. And it means so much to me to broaden that reach so we can help more consultants to climb in consulting. So please hit that share, send it to a friend, and I'm really excited to hear what they think too.
And then I guess the next part of that journey, and it sounds like inferring, but I'll ask that kind of permanent role gave you like that change is as good as a rest. We all know the phrase. It feels like, was that the catalyst? Because you mentioned you kind of fallen out of love with the business. You'd gone into this perm role as a bit of a, something different. What catalyzed that? Like, right, I'm leaving that role and I am coming back to the business. Because almost, I'm sure there'll be people listening here, Toby, say, hang on, you're making a decent salary over here. You've got a business doing 2 million and, whatever the profit margin, that's a lot of money. Like, life's pretty good. Like, what made you go, I'm back to the business, we're all in again?
So, couple of things. So one, I like the diversity. We can talk to it about the other business and stuff. So I've always been someone likes that mix. But I think two things. One, some of the business we were starting to pick up again was more interesting, fast moving, seemed to fit with the things we want to do as we were strengthening it. I think that was part of it. Secondly, having done the perm experience. So I think probably the same, I would imagine. I mean, not being in big consultancy, I imagine it's that I'd gone from one job to 3 jobs. I was getting the top rating score. I was getting told, there's big opportunities. And then partly the nature of what was happening at MG at the time. It had gone through demerging from wider Prudential, taking out Prudential and MG, merged them together and listed them. So there'd been a huge change over 2 or 3 years, rationalising the cost base, a lot of underinvestment previously, and transforming that. And quite a number of good people came in. I guess the same as you can probably get in a big consultancy. Hire a bunch of good people, get past some big workloads, and then go, they can't all have opportunities. And so I think I hit a point where, in theory, you're saying, you can do some really big things here, but it was like frustrating because there just wasn't big things to go and do. It was like, you can solve the next problem for us, but it kept feeling like a sideways movement. And just a surreal day. So I was talking with the director that I reported into, and he was questioning me again. Like, why are you doing this? Why don't you go and focus on building the other stuff? Which partly the reason it was surreal, there was a new exec had started. I'd already lined up to meet them later that morning. And the whole point is I was going to go in and pitch and say, like, right, where's the next big thing? I want to do something bigger. This is it. I'm all geared up. I'd had this conversation with this director early in the day. So I then went into this rather surreal meeting and said, well, it's lovely to meet you. I didn't make the pitch because I decided that was, light bulb moment. That was, which was fun. It was a nice meeting, but it was probably slightly more surreal for both of us than, why has he booked the meeting and what do we do? But I think that was the point of going, okay, I really like what's over there. I want to build it. I think the other couple of things that came out during that period as a combination of both the work with M&G and the work with the business is, I think a couple of the really wonderful things about entrepreneurship and driving that is, one, creating agency, and then secondly, impact. So by creating agencies, so this creating purpose, creating the idea that people are going to do stuff. You think lots of really capable people, very great, but they need a job. And if they don't have a job, however brilliant they are, they're waiting for someone to give them the agency, to give them the reason to go again, which is why it's, it can be really difficult for people between jobs. So that thing that growing a business, creating it starts allowing you to have more of that impact, to create the ideas, to maybe take the things, and there's a few great examples, but taking things that were maybe always there, they weren't this cutting edge new idea, but to do that. And then just the scale of impact and some of the wider things we can do. And it will tie into the culture and sort of how we've tried to sort of build it and scale it since then. But I think those things probably came out. And if anybody was really thinking about it, it's I don't know, my take on it, going back to, you're going to do it for a while, you've got to enjoy it. Those are the sort of things that motivate me, and you want to make some reasonable money along the way. There's a commercial reality that says that if you're not making any money, you can have the greatest business going and wonderful ideas, but it's not going to last very long. So there is a commercial reality. I think if you're purely chasing the money, then that's quite a different world. Whereas those are the things that sort of really has, I think progressively grown from there, as well as the more and more we can see we can do.
Amazing. Well, and as you know on this show, and I know you have learned a lot from others, I always like to ask the questions to help people. And the big question, which we'll unpack, obviously, is 2 to 8 million. I suspect it wasn't just doing the thing you've done. We've all heard that what you've done to get here won't get you there. So, and I'll preface this knowing this probably wasn't exactly how it happened, but you've handed your notice in, you've landed back at the kitchen table with Wendy. What was the plan, or what have been those steps to get you to that? You touched on sales, and maybe that's one to explore, but what are those things you went, right, to your point, I'm excited, I'm fired up, these are those things we need to do?
So I think if you take some core building blocks, and they're not cutting edge, the stuff that, most textbooks, most other things are call out. So, we put in the finance system, we've got a head of finance, we put in, got a marketing team and a bid team and sales. We built it all as a permanent team. So quite a lot before that, we'd had a mix of people. We put in a CRM, we start creating a traditional sales funnel, getting out the comfort zone and starting to work on all of that. So there was a set of things we did around that, which is just all the building blocks that you should do, some of which we had there, but certainly strengthened that a lot, brought in more expertise, worked with different parties, including yourself, to try and get that in a much stronger footing. I think, secondly, we invested quite a lot in the tooling and what we were trying to do in terms of the delivery. So one of the tests is, so clearly a huge strength in lots of consultancies, how much this try and say it's sort of leveraged on process and the rest of it is the strength of your people, the expertise. And we talk about that because we've got a different sort of take on that to, I guess, big consultancy. But one of the acid tests is, like, I'm not worried about them leaving, but if you could apply a straight test, if you've got 5 amazing people working as a team and doing great things, but if they could go into the same client as 5 independent contractors all landing at the same time and do just as much, then you're still not delivering the sort of benefit you should be as a consultancy. So we invested a lot more heavily in tooling and accelerators and starting to create more of that differential. And then I think the third bit is scale and growth. It makes it easier because you just have more capability at your disposal. So, a lot of the things we want to do with clients is, okay, we're running something big for them. It might be a core sort of design and delivery, but they've got a commercial problem. I don't need to sell anything into that, but we can help them with that, or we can help them. They've got an operational problem. They've got a customer problem. So that wasn't cross-selling. That was literally when they've got small problems, but they don't have the expertise or resource in-house. As we've grown bigger, you've got a lot more at disposal to go, like, it's a day's work. We'll just go and figure out that commercial solution for them, or we'll go and how to deal with this supplier problem they've got. We'll go restructure something for them. So I think as we've strengthened the companies, that over time helps. And then those two probably, so the tooling and the extra capability that drives it, that how can you help people? So if you go back to this, we developed IP, we developed tooling. We, for example, have it in a closed section within our website because we want to have a conversation. We give it, but essentially give it away for free. I go back to if all someone needs is a 3-page framework and either has the capability or doesn't have the budget or whatever, saying, well, I'm not giving it to you unless you buy this 6-month piece of work with this team of 5 of that is just F. So give it to them. So invariably we want to talk to people about that, because what I don't want them to do is just misunderstand it. You know, a lot of the standard frameworks, a lot of the assessments, a lot of the other tools are only as good as the person filling it out in the insight. It's just helping to give them a structure and then present the output well and make it happen. So we didn't want to end up in the world that people were just randomly finding it on Google thinking, oh, I've clicked these bits, oh, this is all fine. Or it's not that great because it's not really unlocking stuff. It's the combination of the two. But beyond that, if we can help people, if we can do stuff, then yeah, why wouldn't you? There's no benefit to holding it back. You didn't get the sale. You didn't create any goodwill. You haven't created any reciprocity. It's like if we live in a world that said, look, we fundamentally want to help people. We want to make a difference. And over time, if you do that enough, every so often there'll be work that, bigger bits of work that actually needs doing.
Yeah, it's a great point. I know we've talked about it, and it's the cornerstone of what we do is yes, that give to get, and like you say, actually, the 3-page framework. If someone can use that, they're not going to use you, and that's cool because they might come back to you in 6 months, 12 months. That reciprocity is so important, and I guess there's to the kind of different points you've touched on. Have there been in that kind of 2 to 8 journey any, I guess, inflection points where you've hit a plateau, you've hit a blocker, and you've had to change something? Because increasing by 4x that's I assume a very different organization, but I don't want to assume. You might tell me actually it's not.
No, so I think if you split that to a couple of bits, internal and external. So on internal, clearly it changes the whole organization. Now, probably I should touch on sort of how we hire and we've built, but why it still changes it. So we've always had a model of hiring from the network. So and apologies if this crashes across future questions, but if I talk to
we go where you go, Toby. I've done enough of these. We go where you go.
Excellent. So we want a half of values. We want to get people that are really driven by wanting to transform and implement. So there's a role for risk and assurance and for other stuff, but in terms of what makes us tick, what makes me tick is I really want to go and deliver something. I want to change something. A really simple example is if we did a really great piece of work on a not model, but at the end of it, it's still slideware, even though it's the answer, but we don't get to implement it, we'd just be quite disappointed. Not from a revenue point of view or anything else. We just want to go, like, we actually changed the thing there. We got to implement, we got to do it. So our starting point is we want people that have that like-minded motivation, the people that aren't going to admire the problem, that actually want to solve stuff. We only hire really experienced people. So we do not operate the traditional sort of consultancy pyramid. I think there's a challenge on how and we do have programs and things and teach some people internally, but in terms of bringing young people on, but we don't charge them out. I just struggle however much it is leveraged through a process model they can follow. No company, no client would say, I've got this really big problem. Why don't I go and hire, 10 grads with 2 years experience each, pay 1,200 quid a day each for them, and then I'll have a manager who's a bit more experienced than someone else on top, right? It doesn't make sense if you were doing it internally. You just don't do that, and yet they buy that as a package. And I guess where we've tried to say we just think consultancy would be different, and I think it's where it's moving to at the moment is people want more experienced teams. They want everybody on that team has a level of insight and experience to do it. I guess our teams have a mixture of consultants, but we're not hiring. It's not like they've all come from Big Four or that. So typically we're hiring people who've lived the changes, who's operated the changes, so who are change professionals. We're not trying to take people from completely different sectors and then try or completely different roles, but have far more of that sort of practical experience, emotional intelligence. I think we're huge bit about sort of take the work seriously, but not ourselves. So lots of places aspiring, but I don't know places do it that well, of trying to make sure we're not playing the big egos, so that I must be involved because I'm important as opposed to I've got something to add. So that's sort of how we've recruited. It went through a period. We got to one point and it was getting harder, which is the stereotypical point of sort of recruitment from the network. And does it get exhausted? And then as we've grown again, actually it's got a lot easier because typically we're not recruiting people I know. For example, we're recruiting people that the team know. And as the team has got bigger, and the sweet spot is 2 or 3 of the team know them. So it's not just one person and it's a bit hit or miss. It's like we've got multiple members of the team saying this is someone really good, they fit. Clearly with the challenge with that as well is you want alignment on values, but you want diversity. 50 people that look, sound and think the same is not a healthy place. So that's the challenge through that model of getting that mix, but I think we're doing pretty well with it. When you take to the scaling problem then, so the first one was the scaling made it easier again once we got over the hump. The second bit is we're landing people, even if they land now, but they might have known the team for 15, 20 years. So in terms of feeling a part of it, in terms of landing, it is quite different, I guess, to just landing someone off the market. And we should say, we never go and say, yeah, we've got this, we've got a piece of work. And then half an hour later, there's a job advert on LinkedIn saying, now I need the PM or whatever. So that's how we built it. But it means it's far more tribal, for want of a better word, family. I don't know what the right term is. It's a lot of deep relationships. A lot of it, we know each other's families. We've got a huge history, even if it's people that have come in fairly recently. But then at 50, you can't see everybody. You don't, when you're at 10 to 20, you see everybody. You're on a small number of gigs. It has a different feel to it. So that's an evolution to go through, as sort of how you got to recognize you want to protect the overall culture, but it will be different to where it was before. And how does that keep moving? And then I think, externally, we continue to evolve. I mean, our fundamental point is, as much as possible, we want to contract for outcomes. We believe passionately, I want to be contracted to fit the bathroom, not rent the plumber to do it. I think we can bring a lot more skills to that. But also, I think we bring a lot more flexible resource so that it isn't just, here's a full-time resource, just sits there, does that. But we're having to evolve that bit because I think there's still the challenge of, lots of people like that. And then go, yeah, but how do I get you through the door, or how do we shape the first thing, or that? So I think we keep evolving that to try and make sure it works. And as we've gone to a broader range of customers, it's a chance to make that work. So yeah, I think those things continue to evolve. I suppose the other one, and I'm jumping through potential or questions, but
you just keep going, Toby.
Do I just keep going? It goes to the scaling thing in terms of the culture. So one of our big missions was to be the best place for our people. Like, not just to be a nice place for our people, like intentionally flipping it and saying, we want people to really feel like they belong, that they're a part of it. We are trying to do some different things. And I think to the scaling and partly length of time, part of what you have to recognize in that is people's expectations change. So if you took a really easy one, I think most people would recognize changing jobs and the honeymoon period. Yep, because I'm not in the thing where I was before and I got a bit fed up with those things. I'm somewhere new where there will be a bunch of things that, over time we'll find irritating, or, we'll find as a hang up. But in the first 3-6 months you're there, it's just they're different. So they don't really bother you and they're fine. In a year's time, you go, well, it's still great, but these things are there. So that's just a reality that the expectation changes. It's not what's on the ground has changed, but if you don't keep evolving and if you don't keep growing and doing things differently, where you had a high degree of satisfaction, where people felt like they were really part of it, will drop off because just their expectation of what they want to do and how they're feeling about the place is different.
And how have you, because you're at hiring and culture, we're both on my list, so I'm happy to go into both. I'm maybe just starting with that one. How have you managed that? Because I think it's an interesting point, like you said, the honeymoon period and that kind of inevitable, now this is, what was quirky is now annoying. I think the other side, to your point of wanting to be a tribe or a family, and you touched on it, like when you're 10, you know everyone's kids, you see them daily, weekly, you can go around their house, whatever that is. When you're 50, you might see everyone quarterly or 6 monthly. And I guess within that as well, to your point of expectations, and, I've seen this myself, I've lived it, I've heard it from others. Like, if you join at number 10, you're part of a family. If you're not the founder and, this thing grows around you, suddenly you're in a very different organization. How have you, to your point, combated that kind of honeymoon period and that scale and that changing culture?
So, number of different things. I guess as you scale, it has to become far more across your management team. But then I always wanted that. I never...
So it being...
In terms of the culture, the approach, one of the ways you strengthen the company anyway is through your management team taking more ownership of that, and including the culture and the relationships and how we've grown. But that's perfect. I always wanted to build something that wasn't about us. It wasn't about how it was founded. It was about how we work and feel as a team. So I think, firstly, there's a bit about how people feel that they are part of something. The management team feels they're part of, are making them feel part of something. Because if they're on an account, for example, that I'm not on, or one of the other original team wasn't on, that they still feel a part of it. It's like we're not getting sort of the cliques of a different group. I think part of it is just how we intentionally keep working on what we're doing for our people. So I talk about so one of my big fundamentals is we've got a really experienced team. I think it's the Steve Jobs one of why would you hire really capable people and tell them what to do. So there's a bit on scale that we have to make some stuff work. So people know where who's doing different bits or where to hook into. But as much as possible, we're a flat structure and we treat people as adults. If I took a really simple one, so you're running this business, no one tells you where you need to go or what time you need to get in, or because you're just going to make that happen. It's just, you're not a 21-year-old fresh out of uni who just doesn't know where to fit and needs that structure. And given that we largely have an experienced team, we treat them in terms of all the stuff that we do like that. One of my big bits, which is slightly at odds to a traditional consultancy model, is as much as possible, we don't measure time. We turn everything to outcomes, even for our own people. There is no value to seeing the teams. It sort of came through years of watching some of the big consultancy teams. Thinking things like utilities, like the client team would have all gone home at 5, and yet the consultancy team is still sitting there to 7 and clearly not doing anything, but just the expectation, the presentism that this is how they're going to get ahead. So we try and treat that completely differently. We will support people. We clearly need the people to work as a team, but as much as possible, we're trying to give them as much autonomy. And we're relying on the fact that, if you took to the current debate, there is a big bit about the value of people collaborating. And we would subscribe to that. There's a huge bit about yes, we all prove stuff could get done under COVID, but in the world when we're post that, there is a lot to be said for bouncing ideas and working in person. But we're not doing it by telling people that they must be in the office 3-4 days a week or that. We're trying to do it by inspiring people that they're going to make the right calls of when they want to go, that we can get that level of collaboration. But we're also keeping it flexible. Part the challenge that you're getting at the moment with these really big moves heading back to 4. You must be in the office 4 or 5 days a week in London. Is clearly that just disadvantages whole parts of the workforce. Whether that's people because of childcare issues, or they move further away, they just can't commute in from a cost point, or particularly some of the stuff we would really try to tap into. Some of the really experienced people that just don't want to go and do 5 days, don't want to do 5 days a week and don't want to do it in London, but quite happily do 3 days a week and are absolutely brilliant and bring a whole load of expertise. And so quite a lot of what we've tried to do is create a culture where we're really enhancing all of that. So even if you weren't one of the original 10, whatever, you feel a part of something, it is quite different to probably most of the other options you've got on the table of what you want to do. And it seems to be working.
Well, and it's great to hear. And I know, obviously we've talked about some of this in advance, Toby. So I know some of the secret sauce, but for our listeners, I guess, how have you done that? And I asked this to your point, and I completely agree and love it. The kind of, you want everyone to be able to be autonomous, have their own kind of freedom. They want to be measured on outcomes. And I know you recruit, like you say, from people in the network who've been project managers, they may have been contractors. I guess in one extreme world, there is a risk that, well, if you give people all of complete freedom and just off you go, do your own thing, they almost feel like contractors just under your flag. How have you created that? You talk tribe, family. What are those things you brought in to keep that connection while giving that autonomy?
Autonomy is interesting because it isn't autonomy to not turn up and not do and not be there and somehow just be the solo agent. It's the expectation that, you're sat here. Still come in anyway. Guess no one's telling you where to run your business or what to do, so you could sit at home each day and not come into the office, but you choose to in order to make the business run, to see people, you manage your day. So when we say autonomy, I would talk quite a lot about red face tests. I think it's fairly familiar term, although different people have it. It's pure argument, if I challenged you on what you were doing, if I question what you're doing, if you go, yes, I managed my day, I dropped the kids first, I did it, but I work really hard, I'm absolutely smashing it with the client, you're going to feel indignant. Right? Whereas if you go, oh yeah, I got given this freedom, so I don't really turn up and I don't pull my weight, then you'd be embarrassed or you'd blush. I'd use it more as a guiding principle rather than almost if you haven't had the conversation, it's sort of going wrong anyway. Something's not quite working. So when we say autonomy, this isn't 50 people, just go and do your thing, work around your own brand. It is, we've invested hugely in building the brand, in making people feel a part of it, in trusting that they are going to come and do this. And a bunch of those constraints also fit to, client constraints. A bit like being a plumber. You might go, I work best at night, but you probably can't turn up to, a residential house and start saying, I'll rip the bathroom out at night just because that's when I work best. So we're trying to give people the freedom, but they are bright enough and experienced enough to work out what they need to do, working with the team to work together. We're just framing it in a different culture about how we get there. And if people aren't capable of doing that, then it's not a fit. It's, fortunately, I think the way we recruit the network, we're pretty lucky. It tends to work quite well because we're not trying to do the whole assessment off 2 or 3 interviews and just seeing whether, we've landed the messages right. So I think probably as we've scaled, we have a far greater sense of people feeling part of the company, hugely proud of the company, wanting to be a part of that than even in the early days.
No, I love that. And it does. And to bring that to life, because I know it struck me when we talked about it, but I think it might help our listeners. Yeah, some of those things you do as a company, as a culture, really draw that out. And I'm going to touch on, just because it was where I was going to start this section, but we segued anyway. Tell me about the team's trip around the world, because I think that brings to life how you are investing and giving that tribe, that family feel alongside that autonomy.
Okay, so if you take it back to this premise that we want to be the best place for our people. It's not lip service. It's not a try. We just do nice things. It is, we want to be the best. It's intentionally this sort of happy, empowered, motivated people deliver exceptional things, results for our clients, right? So you'd hope you've got a whole team that wants to deliver exceptional results to their clients, but quite frankly, if it isn't great back at base, that's probably over time is going to run off. Either it's just staff attrition or behaviors. So we're quite focused on trying to do that. As one example of it, ties to our backstory. Over the years, we've done a lot of expeditions. We have other companies sort of building expedition trucks and doing different things. If you took the stereotypical image of a company, that whatever company it is, but a company that's gone well, that you make your money, the argument is, okay, we'll take the money as the founders, we'll go off and do the world trip, leave everybody else working, or we've sold it off or whatever. So what we've looked to do is turn that on its head and go, how do we create those experiences for our teams? How do we share that experience back? And so as part of that, we've driven around the world. As a backstory, we outgrew the Land Rover, although we still have it. So we've converted a 12-ton 4x4 X-Fire engine into a full-on expedition truck. So we're continuing that theme, and we're in the process of a second old fire engine, and the team are going to drive it around the world. And part of the argument for that is a bit like a representation of how much people would step into business, right? Pretty sure if you talk to a lot of people and said, I don't know, what's your lifelong goals? What do you want to do? And some say, I want to travel across Alaska. I want to travel across the outback Australia, wherever they want to go, whatever they want to do. Most people won't do it. Or they'll do it in it might be, well, I finally got to it in retirement, but then I don't do it in quite the same way. I want more comfort. And very few people are going to go, I'm quitting the job. I'm going to take all the cost of buying a vehicle. I'm going to go do this for the next year. So part of this was, well, how do we make it accessible? If we do it as a rolling team, say if you want to do 3 weeks in Alaska, that's cool. We'll work it that the team can rotate. You can fly into Anchorage, for example. You can do a section, and you're part of something bigger. So we make it accessible. We hopefully give some experiences that fit with our wider thing of how do people want to stay a part of this and really feel a part of it. And it's the sort of thing that if you go, I believe, I hope we remunerate people well, and it's a good package. But if you said, well, I'm going to pay everybody an extra £2,000, £3,000. In 10 years' time, they're not going to remember that. But they will remember doing these things. I think the other dimension, or a couple dimensions to it. So one is We do quite a lot for charity. So I think it was, I heard quite a good description of it, I think on High Performance Podcast, I think it was Barry Hearn, describing it was about sort of hitting that point in life where you've sort of gone from sort of building and focusing on you and the family to wanting to give stuff back. He talks about levels, and it was quite a good description. I think recognizing we've got a slightly older, more experienced audience, we are, hit that place where people want to have more impact, to do something more meaningful over and above. So we do quite a lot for charity. We're investing quite a lot in terms of some of the things we do around environment. And for a while, we've wanted to do something really big to raise a significant amount of money for one of our partner charities. So partly it fits with that it wraps up several things that I think really motivate people, give them the feeling of being part of something bigger, which goes back to that culture. You give them autonomy, right? But what do you build as a culture that makes them want to do it? And then finally, I think, we go back to, I think the couple of things really differentiators for us as a business are, given the experienced team, our ability to question things and come up with better ideas, and then the ability to go and execute brilliantly. So what a great example of coming up with different ideas, breaking that sense of agency, and then going and executing a really big experience.
I love it, Toby. And I think, to your point, it brings those values and that purpose to life. And yeah, definitely very, very different. Has it started? Where is the truck started? Is it this year? When is that? Where is that?
So we've done some prep work on it. So it was very much, it was for 2026. So I think we're building through this year.
So your schedule, and I know we're going into the weeds, but I just find it fascinating. Are you kind of blocking out, so-and-so gets it for 2 weeks, so-and-so gets it for 2 weeks, and kind of blocking out chunks of 2026? Is that the idea?
So that's the idea. So I think a couple of bits to it. So this year, there's quite a lot of prep to make that happen. There's some practical bits in terms of we're trying to see if we can do something around a truck to downplate it, to get it below 7.5 tons. That will make it a bit easier for licensing. Otherwise, a few more people need to do some HGV courses this year to be able to drive it. There's there's an element of we need to refurb it in order to just try and make it more reliable. There's quite a lot of planning with the team. I mean, if you take it as an experience with the team work really close together, all know each other, but they don't go off on trips together, and it's a different environment you're creating.
Oh, so you would be sending groups of the team together so 4 of us are going to Alaska together?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
And possibly rolling. It might not be the next 4 are coming in.
Yeah.
In some ways, it might be more of a rolling one. So we're quite lucky. One of the team sort of previously has done I think it's the Fastnet around the world yacht race, but works on the similar sort of thing. So some people are on for the whole duration. Some people come in for phases, slightly longer phases because they're typically going between continents. This has a bit more flexibility in terms of how we can make it accessible for people. But some of that is also trying to align people's expectations and landing, right? It is, yes, there's a whole support network to it. It isn't their truck that they've just broken down in the middle of nowhere and it's down to them in their pocket to fix. But it's not a cruise. And interestingly, talking about the Fastnet one, even there, you would get people coming with different expectations. Land in Perth, waiting for the run up to Japan, I think, and thinking that, they're going to sightsee for the first week rather than understanding they've got to scrub the hull to get the boat ready to go again. So I think there's quite a bit this year in terms of trying to prepare for it. There's some of the stuff we want to do with the partner charity to try and really expand that. But with the target that it was deliver it through 2026.
Amazing. No, I think a brilliant idea, and to your point, they shows the thinking outside the box and coming up with new ideas for the culture and the team. And I don't know anyone else who has done that, Toby, as well. Which is, I think we'll have to do another one of these. Are you doing a YouTube series or a video series? Can we watch it as it goes through?
Yes. So clearly, hopefully, it's going to give a whole load of fantastic sort of video and things to be able to track it. So hopefully, I think we can do that. And interesting. So it has been done once before. We talked to it. So I can't remember the gentleman's name. Set the record for driving a fire engine around the world in 2010, I think, and then went on to set up Flight Club. I think the darts
place.
Yeah.
Wow.
Slightly, he's ended up working the other way around. I think I've heard him talk since, and effectively having done the trip and shown that he could execute something like that gave more credibility for his business ideas, and he's grown a whole bunch of stuff since. But I think it's rare enough that I go back to. I think we're we're not trying to think of, something that's never been done ever in the world before, but I think it's trying to work out, are there just different experiences that we can do?
Yeah, I love it, Toby. And to our conversation way back at the start around entrepreneurship and ideas, doing something like that shows the skills of, being able to manage a project, being able to plan something, being able to execute on something. And if that led him to start Flight Club, he's done all right for himself.
Absolutely. No, his is a brilliant story. And I think if you go back to it being multidimensional, so it's a great representation of some of the core skills we've got, but it's equally to developing people. Yeah, there's some practical skills we've got to develop stuff. I don't know, less people use Microsoft Project these days and use Jira or something else. There's some practical skills you've got to stay on top going in. But actually, if you really want to develop people, how do you take them out of the comfort zone? How do you keep it fresh and relevant? And some of those are, the stereotypical, I guess, outward bound type experiences of take people out of their comfort zone, inspire them again, do something different.
If you are listening to this because you want to improve your consultancy or your practice area or just your career, then I want to give you something that will help you supercharge that on top of this, focused on marketing. If you go to our website, createengage.co.uk/insights, you can download our super detailed ROI-driven strategy framework ebook. In that, we go into detail on exactly what you need to do to build an effective marketing strategy, to build a strategy that will deliver you ROI and help you achieve your growth goals. So take that link, download it, and enjoy that after the end of this episode.
I think this takes us to probably the last thing I wanted to touch on today, which again, I think will help a lot of consulting owners and founders like yourself, because implicit in all of this, so we talked about you grew a business, then you had a job as well as running a business. We haven't actually gone into the detail of it, but you currently run multiple businesses. And obviously we're sitting across from each other today, but I've known you for quite a while. You always seem quite relaxed and you are never short of time. Every time, and it always sticks to me, every time we catch up, we'll have a good coffee, we'll chat for a long time. You never seem in a rush. And in a world today where we're governed by 1 hour Zoom slots, that's unusual. And I would love to kind of understand how you've cultivated that. Is that how, have you always had that relaxed approach? Is it something you've built as doing the business? Was it, to your friend's example, you broke a leg once? Where does that come from? And how do you manage all of these businesses and keep that time, that headspace to stay calm?
So I think a few different dimensions. So one, somewhat we've touched on, it's probably just a natural disposition in terms of liking to create the ideas, liking to shape something to the point it actually executes. But then I've always said, even on specific problems, I can go right down in the detail if I need to because something doesn't sound right. I'm not buying the logic on something, but I'm not a particularly detailed person. So I don't need to get lost in the detail to do it. I think some of it is about how you keep structuring what you're doing. So you've got the capacity, can you get it going? And then how can you do it in a way that can grow? Some of it as well, I think one really good explanation of what is quite a wide phenomenon now. I've listened to it about 3 times now. So Oliver Berkman, I think, was on the High Performance podcast, and just a brilliant discussion about the myth around productivity and the era we live in. This belief that we've always got to be busy, that when I come in and say, I've been working stupid hours, it's just that's somehow a sign of success. That it's just a really good explanation, I think, in a world where a lot of what we often hear is more productivity hacks. I organize my day in this way and I can get 10% more. Part of it, he talks about having finite capacity, so you can change where you prioritize that when you do it. And I think if you can accept some of those things and accept we will always fill up. So I think another key part of it, and as I say, I'd really recommend listening to it because it explains it.
What you said you listened 3 times, and you might have been going on to it. What was so powerful about that interview?
I think it frames a lot of the current challenge. So if I go, I would naturally fill up my day with interesting things. Every so often you can get overloaded and go, wouldn't it be nice to have some quiet time? I often describe, big picture going brilliantly, day to day can be a slog. So, every so often it would be, wouldn't it be nice if just life got a bit quieter again for a bit? It will then start filling it up with other ideas. I just like the diversity of ideas. I think that goes back to natural disposition. So. I love kayaking. I love climbing. I love motorbiking. I'll do a range of stuff. I'm average at all of them because I didn't spend every weekend just kayaking. But I've never just been that passionate about just wanting to do one thing. It's probably the same for businesses. But I think if you can take it into a mindset, so there's probably a couple of bits to it. So part of the mindset is, how are you doing some of the big things and then staying on top of everything else, as opposed to you're just trying to stay on top of everything. One of my big things is I don't like starting the day on checkpoint meetings anymore and that sort of stuff, because it takes me into a mindset of we're just ticking off tasks. And it feels like you're action orientated and you're progressing, but it also feels like you're bogged down in just staying on top of all the small tasks. I want to think about what's the 2 or 3 really big things that we should be progressing. I need to do that higher. We should do this on that business over there. How do I free some stuff up? And then almost how do you stay on top of everything else? Like, we will always pay everybody on time. We're not missing that. Like it's not about getting slack about things like that. But I'm not trying to tick off every email in the email box, and I'm not trying to do everything else. So, and he articulates that pretty well about if you can adapt to recognizing that. I think then if you also accept the finite capacity, so I can say, yes, we've got a number of ideas going on. Some of them are not running as fast as we could run them a lot faster if we just went and did that. So I think we're fairly structured about the thought process. If we've got a plan for the next 2 or 3 years with some of the different businesses and some of the things they're doing, if we see another really great opportunity come up, we will slot it in. We will move some of the other stuff back. So that isn't, I've just seen something glittery and almost forget everything else in a very unstructured way. But it is, if I just stay on this one thing, deliver that on the next year, then I'm going to have a bunch of time period, because there's not necessarily the next great idea or the next opportunity, whatever it is, to do at that point. So we've always gone for evolving that, and then so I'm quite comfortable. It takes a bit longer, and part of it goes back to we really enjoy what we do. We're trying to build the right sort of things. Hopefully, I think to some of the stuff we've illustrated, the culture, a whole range of different things we've done. They're not about just making money quickly and getting out. And some of the stuff we do is not, there are better ways to make money if that was your motivation. So I think if you can be comfortable, you like what you're doing, you can structure it. And however much you might want to think, I can do all these hundreds of things. Okay, they're taking longer, or, you've still only got the same finite capacity. And I just found his set of descriptions of it a far more useful representation than I probably heard other people.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I guess I'm interested in that shift to your point of status meetings, just because it feels like an example that will bring this to life. When did that happen, and what was that turning point? Because like you say, if you went to military boarding school, you've been in consulting, like some form of status meeting has probably been part of your life for quite a long time.
Yeah, so I think probably over the last 3 to 5 years, and partly with the business, and as we've grown, so I'm doing more of the central stuff, I've got more control over how I'm structuring my day and what I'm doing. I think when you step back on a lot of meetings, there's a lot of meetings that you do to keep everybody aligned, to keep things moving on, to make it happen, but how much is really productive? Some of it you get a bit of a contrast through COVID. There was still those things happen. Some of them had to happen because everybody was remote, but you stop filling up all the time that you would have filled up being in the office, plugged down to the office at 5 o'clock in the morning to be there for 8 in the city, work all day. Actually, can you achieve a lot more with a lot less of that? So I'd probably adapt to that a lot more over the last 3 years, and some of that's just been the flexibility of what we can now do.
I love it. And I appreciate this is probably what we have covered, but I'll ask it in case, for anyone who is struggling with that, they're working 50, 60-hour weeks, they're feeling they're in the productivity trap. What would your kind of advice be to get yourself out of that, or someone out there? Would it be listening to the Oliver Burkeman podcast? Is there anything you've given to others in your team or friends or clients to kind of help them break that cycle?
So I do think that podcast is a really good example of understanding that. And some of it's a lot of it is behavior and what you're choosing to prioritize. So he talks about that, we all have endless inboxes. Now, his argument is you can choose to be on top of your inbox if you want, but that means you won't be on top of something, or you won't do something. We fill up our days and we do it. So I would argue it's a much better explanation than summarizing. It's about an hour-long podcast, I think. So it's a really interesting thing, and I think a lot of it is how you frame stuff. I think then if you take the people back to that are doing 50 to 60 hours, There are probably multiple variations, but if you took a couple, one is it's just a mindset. You're a detailed person, you're ticking every box, you're doing everything, you believe you are just going to work stupid hours. And I know I've got some friends who are like that. They're just workaholics. They would just, how is it that they've been through 10 or 15 years of different places, and in every place it required them to work 12, 14 hours a day? It's like, because I go to lots of different places and I see where the teams are, and it just doesn't take that to do the thing. So some of that I think is a mindset. And then the second bit, as opposed to just a general mindset, I'm constantly trying myself busy, is back to that ability to just step back and question what you're trying to achieve. What are you trying to achieve? What's really important to doing that? What's the big levers? What do you have to stay on top of? Hygiene factors, you have to stay on top beyond that. And I think you can reframe quite a lot of those. So I'd say that's the far more influential one. There are, I think of another scenario, particularly in very small businesses that are very lean, where they feel that the economics means I can't break through to that scaling point. That's a bit harder. I was talking to someone a week or two ago, and just in their business model, it's just very low margins, and their ability to scale it and do something is just much, much harder. But if we took it into a lot of corporate world, that feels far more of a small business or something else. If you took it into normal corporate world, I think it's far more about how you're approaching the problem.
Yeah, no, I think I love your point around your friend. And like you say, so often, we create what we choose to, and there's always a way to do 8 hours, there's always a way to do 12, and you're right, things like inboxes, we are taught, and I've been guilty of this before, you get to the inbox to 0, therefore you've achieved. And actually that's become my New Year's resolution now, Toby, is to try and look at my inbox as little as possible, which is why you didn't get a reply. Not that I don't like you, but I think you're right, it's amazing how many problems solve themselves or are not problems. And if things are problems, usually they get to you.
Yep.
So yeah, I think some great advice. Sorry, looks like you got more.
Well, if I take it to, partly it's back to that, person breaking their leg and then realizing that actually there's a better way of delegating. Partly if I take it to a sporting example, so being married to a Kiwi, and the whole family is into rugby and still coach and try not to do contact these days and just play touch rugby. And hitting
you
that
still play? I didn't know that.
Yeah. Mainly touch rugby, it's better. It's like every so often it's a bright idea to go back to contact. That's so the boys still playing that, which is great. But it's a really interesting one from the hitting that age, you pick up more injuries and stuff. I will normally play, quite fast, quite physical, and then I'll start pulling a muscle in a leg or something, and suddenly go, I can still play, but I can't do this, and I will completely change how I play. You're still the playmaker, but you're far more orchestrating the play, and you just know when you're not working anywhere near as fast. I'm still quite effective. It's an interesting one because when I'm not trying to deal with an injury or that is not how I play or how I do. But you go when you slow it and you step back and you think, you can have a big impact. And I think that's probably quite the same in a work setting. We all have our natural dispositions of how we think the work should be done and what's important and how we go about things. Actually, if you're sort of forced to change it, you find you can be just as effective, if not more.
Yeah, I love that example. I stopped playing a few years ago, partly ailments, partly I started to feel old, mainly because I wanted to go home and spend time with my wife, not go to the nightclub anymore. But it's similar. I played badminton as well. And you're right, that kind of, there are people who are much older, much slower, but could play as well, and in many cases better, because they could take the time, step back, and actually the fast running around the court could keep you up, but would make you very tired. And so I think it's a great analogy. I'm conscious, Toby, we are drawing towards the end of our time, and we have lunch after this, and I think you've got school pickup as well after
later
lunch.
On.
So
yep.
We need to make sure we can get both done. So we're coming to questions that I know you will have listened to hundreds of guests answered, and I'm sure, therefore, you will have some great answers to them. And these are our quickfire questions at the end. The first one is books, but can be podcasts, can be YouTubes. There are many different mediums, and we've already got one. But I'll ask it as you know it, and you can answer it how you want. What is the book or books you've gifted or have had the biggest impact on you, and why?
So I think if you split it to a couple of bits, so I don't tend to read management books. So I read quite a lot on different articles and different things. Probably in terms of the business and some of the stuff I'm looking at, I get far more off podcasts. I'll credit you with getting into it. I never used to be a podcast fan, but listened to a range. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of, I've sort of touched on them, a couple of the high performance ones. I'd say Oliver, Barry Hearn, who have just been sort of quite useful in not revolutionary, but framing some of the phases in that. Another one that really stuck out as well, actually, was a slightly different person, but I think it was Rebel Wilson on it. And there's quite a lot of people that talk about hitting an inflection zone and needing help to, they needed to face up to, they didn't have these skills, they didn't have these challenges. What massively stuck out about her story was that she effectively did it herself. She didn't go to someone, and there's nothing wrong with going to someone and asking for help, but it was just quite noticeable. Some of the things she made, put herself in uncomfortable situations to go and address some of the skills and some of the challenges she needed to do to do it. Which, there's quite a few bits on that, I guess. And I've suggested, there's a number of different ones, and say that Oliver one I think is quite useful to a lot of people feeling overwhelmed. On a reading thing, I tend to read completely different stuff, so it's far more sort of expeditions and travel and people have done overseas. But some of that, whilst I wouldn't necessarily recommend specific books, it's about having that bigger picture and a different perspective.
Well, and I think those sort of, like you say, those expedition stories, those adventures also, make you think, well, certain things aren't that hard. If you're in our world, if you're kind of up Everest and, there's a risk you could die, most client issues will never get that serious. You might get fired, but you won't die.
Absolutely. And I think it just keeps a wider perspective on the world. There's bigger things that want to go and do, want to think about, want to make happen, which is keeps that looking at that bigger picture.
Definitely. And thank you. I'm honoured that I was the gateway drug for podcasts, or my guests were. And for anyone who they're just picking this up because they know you, not me, are there particular episodes that you've listened to, you're like, that's the guest on Climbing Consulting I would recommend listening to?
I think it's more nuanced because it comes down to, so I think we've talked about this before. One of the things that I thought was brilliant, particularly through the early days of the podcast, and it's carried on, but it was early days in terms of when I was getting most out of it, was obviously you set it up, I think, with this premise that it was helping people to access the advice that if they weren't in a traditional big consultancy, they might not have heard. But clearly the nature of the guests of people who have really got there and done it meant that it's far more entrepreneurial. It's far more people who maybe were in that thing and then have moved out or have built to a different one. Yeah, I think Dom's been on twice. I mean, that resonates for me just because, as I say, it was part of the early days, did his course. It framed quite a lot of the stuff. And then sort of weird because obviously a lot of your guests have also then been part of the Consultancy Growth Network and others. So it's become a small world. I've met them. Yeah,
no, and it's something, Toby, maybe we'll chat about it at lunch. At some point, I'd love to bring everyone together because you're right, it's a small world. Many of the guests now know each other either through the podcast, through the network, through other connections. And I know we touched on it right at the start, but for me, it's amazing to hear the impact that Dom's course and that had on you and your journey, because like you say, it's why the podcast started, why I started the whole series, was to give advice to others who don't get it themselves. I was to your point of jobs, or to how much time do you have? I was a contractor. Let's say probably I had more space in my 5 days a week than there was work. And, I needed some advice, guidance, and the rest is history. And 6 years later, here we are. So now I'm really pleased. And then the last one, which again, you will know, and I'm excited for your answers. You have 3 people in front of you. One just starting out in career in consulting, 1 4 to 5 years in, and 1, as you know, I call it partner, but where you're not in a big consultancy. It could be someone going out on their own like yourself, someone becoming part of your leadership team. And as you know, it's what one piece of advice would you give to each of them?
So I think for the young person, and I guess this is more general advice outside of a traditional big consultancy. I guess there's a whole pattern to that, but I still think it will stand true. So I think a young person, it's about the ability to start stepping up, owning things, proving get stuff done. I think as President Obama had quite a good summary of it. It's like, stop looking for the big glitzy job. Just prove whatever it is that you're given that you can just get stuff done. Get a reputation for being someone who delivers, who makes stuff happen. I think particularly as you're growing to that 4 or 5 year point, it's probably a path through. I suppose the couple of bits of advice that resonated. One is that sort of curiosity. Go and learn lots of different things. I guess particularly if you come in through a big recruitment model, then you potentially got pigeonholed into one area. It's like, don't let yourself get pigeonholed. Go and find all the things that really interest you, where you can make a difference, and just work at being good in those things. I think the second bit, I think it might have been one of your guests, but apologies, I can't remember which one, but talked about go and just meet people, network with people, go make friends with people now, because in 10, 15 years time, they'll be in more significant places. You'll be in more significant places. You've just got far more of a network. And that will stand you in good stead, whatever you do, whether you leave consulting, whatever you do, just that ability to be networked. Lots of people struggle in later life because they didn't, and they're suddenly in a world where they're more senior. It doesn't have to be out of consultancy. It can just be out of a normal business, really struggling to know who to pick up the phone to talk to ideas, to bounce stuff around. So, and then, I guess at the point you're hitting that partner level, I guess you've got a real choice to make about, well, what do you want to be a part of? I mean, to a certain extent, you're on a track with somewhere, you're getting close to that. I think, what sort of culture do you want? What do you want to stand for? I'd describe it with, big consultancy, or it's big labels. So, it can attract criticism, but the reality is there's good, bad, and indifferent, and all of them, a lot of that is shaped by the partners and the divisions, and sort of what do you want to be a part of? What are you shaping up? And I think being true to that, because I think the thing that, and lots of your guests have referred to it, is, particularly if you're in a big consultancy, is this whole goal is to get to partner. That's the prize. You came through the pyramid, you did all this work, and yet that's just the start of the journey. You're going to be there for quite some time. Are you enjoying what you're doing? Do you believe in what you're doing? Are you in a culture where you can operate into the principles and morals that how you want to run? So, yeah.
Well, some great advice. And yes, I think your last point there, it was from memory, it was Jessica Frame from BCG who said that consulting's a burger eating contest, and when you get to partner, the reward is more burgers. And I think, it's as true, like you say, whether you're going for partner in a big firm, you're running your own consultancy, the reward you have had for going from 2 to 8 is more burgers, and you've got to make sure that that's the thing you want to keep eating, doing for for that period of time. So, Toby, some great advice. Thank you. This has been fantastic. I'm very pleased to say, 6 years on from when we first met, we are sitting down here, and also well done to you on the scale and pace of growing the business over that time as well, because that's an amazing achievement. For anyone who wants to find out more or wants to get in touch, I was going to say wants to find out about jobs, but you don't I don't know, if they don't know you, they're not going to get through. But if anyone wants to find out more about yourself and Cross 8, where would you point them to? Where can they get in touch?
So easiest point is LinkedIn. So Tobias Robinson. You can find me at Cross 8. Email tobiasrobinson@cross8.co.uk, or you can see us through the website. To the point, we do hire in a particular way, but we still, we're open to talking to people, building relationships. Some of the people we have brought in, we've sort of built that over time. So, really happy to talk to anybody that wants to. And and what a privilege to come on. Like, genuinely, it's been really good, given what a part it's been in terms of where we've grown the business. So thank you very much.
No, thank you, Toby. I've really enjoyed it. Thanks a lot.
Today's episode is brought to you by Create Engage, the specialist digital marketing agency for the disruptive management consultancy. Now, for long-time listeners, you will probably already know who we are. You may have even heard one of our ads on a previous episode of this podcast. But for those of you who don't, here is a short introduction. At Create Engage, we help you create an effective marketing strategy for your consultancy, a strategy that will resonate with your target clients. And then we support you by delivering the campaigns you need to turn that strategy into a reality, helping you to build your brand, raise your profile with your prospective clients, and ultimately generate return on investment from your marketing activity. Now, I could tell you about many of the great clients that we work with and the results we've delivered for them. But instead, I'm going to do something much more powerful, and something that I would recommend you do for your own marketing. I'm going to let our clients do the talking for us. If you are currently thinking about marketing for your consultancy, you're going to want to listen to this.
Create Engage started the process for us. They managed it end to end. They came up with some really creative ideas, and we were really happy with the work that they did, which meant that we could just focus on running the business. Not only did we start conversations with clients that we hadn't spoken to before, but also there was tangible return on investment by some work that we were given.
They've helped right from the initial shaping of the idea through to helping us work out what our end goal was. They've supported us with the visual identity and our positioning of the brand.
We've had an immediate expansion of our network and have initiated a raft of new conversations with owners, CEOs in target client organisations, and has led to us winning new projects already.
One of the greatest compliments, I guess, is that one of our competitors even said that they really like what we're doing with marketing and they wish they could be doing something as good.
So from our perspective, we couldn't recommend Create Engage any more than this.
I would certainly recommend Create Engage if you're a consulting firm. They really understand consultancies and the sort of challenges we face. And, I don't think you're going to get much better marketing anywhere else.
So I wouldn't hesitate to recommend Create Engage. They did a really good job for us.
So if you're looking for an agency that can help you achieve the results that our clients just described, then head to our website, createengage.co.uk, where you can find out more about how we support consulting firms like you. You can download our latest ebook and you can get in touch to talk about how we can help you take your consultancy to the next level through digital marketing. I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Climbing Consulting. If you have any guest recommendations, comments, ideas, thoughts on how I can make this show better for you, just drop me an email. It's nick@createengage.co.uk, and I really look forward to hearing from you.